The clock is ticking in Washington. With just days before the October 1 deadline, Congress faces yet another high-stakes standoff over government funding. Democrats accuse Republicans of pushing the nation to the brink, while Republicans insist they are only asking for a straightforward extension to keep the government open. At the center of the showdown stands President Trump, who has become the decisive figure in whether the nation avoids a shutdown or plunges into chaos. The stakes are enormous. Military families, seniors, farmers, and millions of everyday Americans could feel the immediate consequences. But beyond the rhetoric, this battle reveals a deeper struggle over political leverage, credibility, and the future direction of U.S. policy. The funding deadline has once again exposed the deep divisions between Republicans and Democrats. On one side, President Trump and House Republicans are calling for what they describe as a clean funding extension, essentially keeping the government open by carrying forward the same budget Democrats themselves supported just months earlier, with adjustments for inflation. They argue this is the simplest, most responsible solution that avoids unnecessary drama and ensures stability. On the other side, Democratic leaders Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries are pushing back, insisting that key changes, especially regarding healthcare subsidies and Medicaid protections, must be included before they will agree to any short-term deal. The White House position has been clear. During a press briefing, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt emphasized that Republicans and the administration want nothing more than a straightforward extension. Quote, "What this White House wants and what Republicans want, we want a clean funding extension to keep the government open. That's all we're advocating for, a simple, clean budget extension." She noted that Democrats had supported this same framework 6 months ago, but now seemed willing to walk away. From the administration's perspective, Democrats are playing political games, with ordinary Americans at risk of becoming collateral damage in a partisan fight. President Trump himself, after initially signaling skepticism about meeting with Democrats, has now agreed to sit down with Schumer and Jeffries. Reports describe this as a rare and important development, since just weeks earlier he had dismissed the idea of negotiating. The shift underscores the weight of the looming deadline and the fact that despite Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Thune technically leading their chambers, Trump remains the final decision-maker. His willingness to meet highlights both the urgency of the moment and his pivotal role in shaping the outcome. This could be the first formal meeting between Trump, Schumer, and Jeffries on this issue, making it a defining political moment. Republicans argue that the real danger lies in the Democrats' sudden change of position. They highlight that Schumer himself once said, "Avoiding a shutdown is very good news for the country, for our veterans, for parents and children, for farmers, and for small businesses." Similarly, Hakeem Jeffries previously warned that families will be hurt if there is a government shutdown, farmers will be hurt, holiday travel will be impacted. These words, Republicans say, show that Democrats know exactly what is at stake. Yet despite these warnings, Democrats are now threatening to block the same extension they once approved, creating the very crisis they warned against. For Democrats, the explanation is simple. They argue that circumstances have changed. Senator Schumer defended his reversal by saying things have changed in 3 ways. First, since March, the American people have seen how terrible the Trump administration policies are. Their costs are going up because of tariffs, because of electric bills, and most of all, because of the decimation of health care. He continued by accusing the administration of illegally circumventing appropriations bills through so-called rescissions, and he declared that Democrats are now united against the status quo. From their perspective, refusing the short-term extension is about leverage, forcing negotiations on health care and broader budget priorities. At the heart of this dispute lies the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid. Democrats are demanding extensions of Obamacare subsidies that are set to expire and protection of Medicaid provisions they claim Republicans have targeted. They warn that without these guarantees, premiums could rise and vulnerable families could lose access to affordable coverage. Republicans counter that these issues should not be tied to a simple government funding bill. They argue such policy debates belong in the regular appropriations process, not in a short-term measure designed purely to keep operations running. This clash over process versus policy has become the central fault line in the current standoff. The consequences of a shutdown are not abstract. Federal employees could face furloughs, national parks may close, and key services, from processing veterans' benefits to supporting small business loans, could grind to a halt. Military families could see pay delayed, and critical security operations could be hampered. Republicans stress that they are working to prevent these outcomes by supporting an extension, while Democrats risk triggering the very chaos they once condemned. The White House has warned that if the government shuts down, it will only hurt the most vulnerable in our country: our seniors, our veterans, our military families. The political dynamics surrounding this battle have also been shaped by recent events. Following the tragic assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk, Republicans emerged with what many described as renewed unity. At Kirk's funeral, leaders from across the GOP presented a unified front, honoring his legacy and emphasizing solidarity. Some observers noted that Kirk had played a behind-the-scenes role in trying to repair the relationship between Elon Musk and President Trump. That history now intersects with the budget fight, as Republican cohesion around Trump appears stronger than in previous funding battles, potentially changing the calculus heading into these final days. Despite the appearance of unity, fractures still exist. Within the GOP, the House Freedom Caucus often pushes leadership to adopt more aggressive negotiating tactics, while establishment Republicans favor pragmatic deals. Democrats are betting that these internal tensions could resurface at any moment, weakening Trump's hand. Yet for now, most Republicans are backing the White House position. The looming question is whether Trump's meeting with Schumer and Jeffries will produce compromise or deepen the stalemate. Both outcomes carry major implications, not just for the budget, but for the credibility of each party heading into future elections. Looking back, government shutdowns have often carried political risks. In the past, whichever side was perceived as unreasonable often suffered at the ballot box. Trump and his allies are keenly aware of this history, which is why they emphasize that Democrats are the ones changing their stance. They argue that the White House is being consistent, advocating only for the same budget Democrats themselves passed months ago. By presenting themselves as the steady hand, Republicans hope to frame Democrats as reckless actors willing to jeopardize ordinary Americans' well-being for political leverage. It is a calculated strategy designed to flip the usual shutdown narrative. Meanwhile, Democrats frame the showdown as a moral fight. They argue that healthcare is too important to leave unresolved, and that standing firm now is the only way to prevent harm later. They contend that Republicans are ignoring the struggles of working families, instead prioritizing tax policies and spending levels that favor the wealthy. Schumer's statement, quote, "We cannot allow the present situation, the status quo, to continue when the American people are demanding change," end quote, reflects this posture. For Democrats, walking away from a clean extension is a risk, but one they believe is justified by the larger political and policy stakes. The calendar only raises the pressure. With both chambers of Congress briefly recessed for the Jewish holiday, time is extremely short. Reports note that even if the Senate returns, there may only be 1 or 2 days left to strike a deal before funding lapses. Any delay risks running the clock entirely. That urgency is why Schumer and Jeffries pushed for a direct meeting with Trump, recognizing that no path forward exists without his involvement. Whether Trump uses the meeting to strike a pragmatic deal or to hold firm against Democratic demands will likely decide the outcome. From a strategic perspective, Trump's agreement to meet is notable. It signals that he wants to be seen as engaged and willing to negotiate, countering portrayals of him as inflexible. Yet it also places him in the spotlight, ensuring that any deal or failure will be attributed directly to him. For a president who thrives on control and decisive action, this could be an opportunity to demonstrate leadership. Supporters argue that Trump is uniquely positioned to cut through the gridlock, while critics warn that his hardline stance risks pushing the nation into unnecessary disruption. The debate also reflects broader ideological divides about the role of government. Republicans emphasize restraint, fiscal discipline, and the dangers of constant spending increases. Democrats emphasize social safety nets, healthcare protections, and the need for expanded support programs. Both sides claim to speak for ordinary Americans, but their competing priorities often make compromise elusive. The shutdown fight has become the latest proxy for these larger arguments, with each party seeking to define what responsible governance means in practice. At its core,
Or the battle is less about technical budget lines and more about political values. What complicates matters further is public opinion. Polls show that voters generally dislike shutdowns and often blame both parties when gridlock occurs. However, whichever party appears more extreme tends to suffer more politically. Republicans argue that Democrats are now the ones taking an extreme position by rejecting the very extension they previously endorsed. Democrats counter that Republicans are being unreasonable by refusing to negotiate on healthcare provisions. The White House is betting that Americans will side with stability over brinksmanship, while Democrats are gambling that voters will appreciate their stand for healthcare and fairness.
The history of shutdown politics suggests that perception often matters more than the technical details. In 2013, Republicans faced backlash for forcing a shutdown over Obamacare. In 2018, Democrats were blamed for a brief shutdown tied to immigration policy. Both examples demonstrate how quickly public opinion can turn against whichever side appears obstructionist. Trump's allies frequently cite these precedents to argue that Democrats are taking a dangerous risk by opposing a clean extension. They believe history will repeat itself, that Americans will punish Democrats for bringing avoidable disruption into their lives. Still, Democrats remain confident that their narrative is stronger. They point to rising costs, healthcare uncertainty, and what they describe as Trump's failed economic policies. By tying the shutdown fight to broader frustrations, they hope to shift the conversation from process to substance. Schumer's remark that tariffs and energy bills are decimating household budgets illustrates this strategy. Democrats want voters to see the shutdown not as a procedural squabble, but as part of a larger struggle over economic fairness and healthcare access. Whether that message resonates in the heat of a deadline crisis remains to be seen. One overlooked factor is the impact on the military. The Pentagon has already warned that a shutdown could disrupt training, delay pay for active duty service members, and hamper readiness. Republicans argue that Democrats are willing to put national security at risk for political gain. They highlight that the proposed extension includes additional funding for member security, judicial branch protection, and White House security, measures Democrats should support. Yet, Democrats insist that without healthcare guarantees, even national security concerns cannot override the need for broader reform. This clash of priorities underscores just how entrenched both sides have become.
As the deadline nears, financial markets are also paying attention. Past shutdowns have rattled investor confidence, slowed economic growth, and undermined international perceptions of American stability. With inflation concerns still lingering and global conflicts demanding U.S. attention, the risk of signaling dysfunction is particularly high. Supporters of the White House argue that Trump is working to protect the economy by avoiding a shutdown, while Democrats risk destabilizing markets by insisting on last-minute demands. Critics of Trump, however, argue that his broader policies already created instability, making compromise even more necessary. For President Trump, the political stakes could not be higher. As he navigates re-election dynamics and seeks to reinforce his image as a strong leader, how he handles this shutdown fight will shape public perception. If he successfully positions himself as the adult in the room, advocating stability while Democrats obstruct, he could emerge stronger. If the government shuts down, however, and Americans feel pain, opponents will blame him directly. It is a delicate balancing act, but one that Trump has chosen to embrace by stepping into direct negotiations with Democratic leaders.
Ultimately, the outcome will hinge on whether compromise is possible. Can Democrats accept a short-term extension without their health care demands, trusting that negotiations will continue later? Or will they hold firm, forcing a shutdown to make their point? Can Trump offer enough concessions to secure a deal without alienating his Republican base? These are the questions hanging over Washington. What is certain is that the American people, from farmers to military families, are watching closely, and they will remember who stood for stability and who chose brinksmanship in this critical moment. As the nation waits for answers, one truth remains. Government shutdowns are avoidable. They are not acts of nature, but results of political decisions. The question now is whether leaders will prioritize the well-being of Americans over partisan games. President Trump has staked his position on responsibility and continuity, urging Democrats to join him in passing a clean extension. Democrats, however, are gambling that pressing their advantage on health care is worth the risk. In the coming days, the choices made in Washington will echo far beyond Capitol Hill, shaping the nation's economy, security, and trust in government itself.